Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. Today I'm joined by Daryl Wake of Dekra, and we're going to pose you an interesting and challenging question. Are you good or just lucky when it comes to safety? And specifically, we're talking here about serious injuries and fatalities. This is a recording of a safety roundtable session. Daryl is going to talk through some of Dekra's insights and knowledge about SIF prevention and share some really interesting and insightful data about the topic. And then, as always, that prompts a nice interactive discussion. Trust you'll enjoy this one, and I hope that it makes you think carefully and perhaps changes some of your mindsets around skill versus luck when it comes to safety. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Right, welcome everybody to today's safety roundtable discussion. Really pleased to have a great guest with us on today's session, Daryl Wake from Dekra. I'll let Daryl introduce himself in a second, but we're going to be speaking about SIF prevention, stopping serious injuries and fatalities, and asking the provocative question, are you good or just lucky? So I posted a little bit about this this week on LinkedIn and had some interesting discussions with people in the comments and on DMs and stuff and in emails. So been looking forward to this one. As always, it's a safety roundtable. The idea is it's interactive. I'm going to introduce Daryl. He's going to talk about this topic for maybe half an hour or so in total. But if you've got any questions, fire them into the chat or raise your hand, and at an appropriate time, I'll ask you to unmute and ask. And then obviously at the end, we're going to open it up, as we always do, to an interactive discussion as well. So hopefully that all makes sense. And I think let's get started. So Daryl, thank you for joining. If you want to share your screen and make a start.
Yep. Did that work?
Yeah, that's working.
Okay, so you can see that screen?
Yeah.
Right, so thanks for having me, Christian, and good afternoon to everyone on the call. So my name is Daryl Wake. I work with an organisation called Dekra. Very briefly, some quick insights into Dekra. We're a very old company. Next year, we're 100 years old. We are a large organisation, 49,000 people. We have 60 offices in 60 different nations. And my particular business unit is called Dekra Organisational and Process Safety. So on my side of the fence is more the organisational safety, not the process safety. So we do a lot of work around cultural diagnostics, cultural transformation, safety leadership development, behavioural safety sciences, a lot of project support, and serious injury and fatality prevention, which the topic to me is quite dear to my heart. The accent gives it away. I'm not from this part of the world originally. I'm an Australian native. And sadly, I've actually lost very close friends at work in the past as well. So what I'll take you through is we're a data and research rich organisation, although we like to think we are. So I want to take on a bit of a journey, looking back in time around serious injury and fatality, look at some numbers, and then look at some work that we did quite some time ago when we started to really get focused and fixated on preventing exposures of the highest calibre when people were set to work. And then some considerations and thoughts around some things from our point of view that you as organisations really, and your senior leaders really need to focus on to make a true difference in those more catastrophic events that we have in the workplace globally. So with no further ado, and I hope the technology, did that change, Christian? You can see a different screen now?
Yeah, all working well.
Yep, okay, all right. So the starting point for us was in about 2008, 2009. So Dekra acquired, as some organisations do on their journey to be the global partner for whatever. How do you get in that space quickly? You acquire business. So my business that I first got into safety consultancy was BST, or Behaviour Science Technologies, globally recognised consultancy firm. So it was BST, obviously now Dekra, and you can see here over a course of about 30 plus or minus years, the two graphs basically, or trend lines. I'm going to ask a question to everyone to get some engagement there, Christian. So the black line is what we refer to as the non-fatal, let's call it the total recordable or lost time injury frequency rate, is the black line. And the red line is the fatal line. Now, I'll show you some more data in a moment, but this came out of the US, a few years old, I agree, and I've got some more data. But when you look at those two trend lines, and I'm going to pose a question to you all, what do you see when you look at those two trend lines? I'm going to pick someone. Is it Andy Kowalski, is it? Andy? Are you there, Andy? Hello. Just put yourself off mute for a moment, please. Well, Andy, when you see these two trend lines, so the black one is non-fatal, the red one is the fatality rates, what do you see over a course of about 30 years?
Basically, what I found is we had with near-miss incidents in 2011, 2012, that myself and my colleague hadn't dealt with it. It could have gone into a pretty serious accident involving all three emergency services and knocking out power supplies to various buildings and to a substation, because people who should have known better and allowed the situation to evolve.
Okay, all right. And so when you see the black line, though, Andy, would you agree over a period of 30 years that things are getting better? It's reducing, right? You'd agree. And when you look at the fatality rate over the past 30 years, what do you see? Would you agree that there's very little change, or in fact it's possibly even slightly getting worse? Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So thank you, Andy. So when these two lines started to get extremely close together, BST and a few other organisations got really, really interested in what the hell's going on. And so if I just wind the clock forward slightly as well, so the top one is the amount of fatality rates out of the US at the workplace, and this here is the last few years out of the UK. Colleague of mine who's on the call as well, Christian Hopper, he kindly actually did some quick insights yesterday as well. And again, last year, more people at work, I think it was 2%. I think 3 more people. I think it was 138 people last year died at work. So when you think about the research, the advanced technology, robotics, everything, over the past 30 years, we've got no better at that in the workplace. And in fact, so I was with another safety group only earlier last week, and they said it's the same in our industry as well. They were in like construction logistics, and they were saying exactly the same stuff is happening in their sectors. So the starting point, fatalities, they're not getting better. So let's have a look at some of the work that we did. Again, it wasn't just us. We brought together, there was Campbell Institute, who's the R&D part of OSHA over in America. So the starting point from us was in 2008, 2009. So we brought, as you can see, a collection of multinational, very high-profile home brand organisations. And what they did is they brought together a collection, as you can see. It was over 1,028 accident report forms, investigation forms. And the work study group reflected upon Heinrich's safety triangle. Of course, it's been around different iterations since 1932, when Heinrich published that book. I think it was called the Workplace Accident or something similar to that. And so the first question, when we looked at the data from all of these companies, the two very simple questions is, when we look at these numbers, when we look at the numbers and we look at Heinrich's safety triangle, so of course, you know, the first question was, does it describe what's going on? So is there less of these lower incidents and not many of those sort of more recordable lost time injuries and very few fatalities? And as you can see from some of the data here that's to the right here, the answer to that was yes. All right. So yes, these organisations see a lot more lesser, some of those medium sort of categorised incidents, and not many fatalities. So that was tick. Yep, we've done that. The second question that the work study group posed to themselves through our guidance was the old analogy that many of us safety professionals have always had was, if we chip away at the bottom, the numbers at the top should reduce, right? And that's, some of us get fixated and focused on that. So when we look at the numbers, does it actually predict what's going to happen? You work away at the bottom, the numbers at the top reduce. And the answer to that was no, it does not. So I'll show you in a slide in a few moments where there's actually a certain amount of these incidents. If it wasn't for one what if and a whole lot of luck, the numbers at the top would have been significantly different. So just hold that for now. So when we talk about SIF exposure, we talk about two things. SIF actual, somebody passed away at work. It's either a life-threatening, so if someone didn't get immediate support, medical support, they possibly would have passed away, or life-altering injury. So that you're talking about, you know, paralysis, blindness, amputation, etc., etc. So that's the first thing. SIF actual, SIF potential. So if you repeat that event, again, a whole lot of luck. What do the workers think about this? The two together is what we call your SIF exposure rate. I'll get more onto metrics in a moment as well. So we don't have many of these, very few actuals. We do have many potentials, and that equals your overall SIF exposure. Now, for these events to take place, what we call SIF potentials and or SIF actuals, three things must occur. So first thing is you have to have a high-risk situation, working at heights, lifting operations or dropped objects of a certain magnitude, confined space events, hot work, anything to do with motor vehicles, particularly over a certain speed, etc., etc. So those tasks typically in an office environment, you know, around ergonomics, any sort of perhaps trip at ground level, typically would be excluded. But again, it depends. You have to analyse your data. So you have to have a high-risk situation. As you can see from our initial baseline work group study, 81% of these are just routine, run-of-the-mill jobs I do on a day-to-day. I work in a refinery. I drive a vehicle to a cement plant or whatever it is. I go in, in a warehousing facility and drive a forklift. They're just normal.
So Daryl, just to be clear then, so what we're saying here is that of the high-risk situations, 81% of them are happening day in and day out. So in other words, 19% of high-risk situations are unexpected, but 81% are expected.
Correct.
Yeah.
Some things, condition or circumstances may well have changed beyond normal control, but the rest of them is just, I'll go about my normal job. Absolutely, Christian. Yep. So that's the first thing, high risk. Secondly, there's something wrong with your management controls. HSE management controls are either not in place, they're not effective, or for whatever reason, somebody chose not to follow them. So that's the second thing. You've got problems with your management controls. A third thing, they're never, ever, ever one-offs. So they've been allowed to continue for whatever reason. They're cultural problems and leadership challenges that have led to these events. And I'll show you an example in a moment as well. That's happened with one of our clients. So that's around the SIF precursors, all those things that is the catalyst or trigger that makes these events become reality. So a new way of looking at this is what we call the triangle within the triangle. Okay, so the work study group, the initial one, was 21%. What does that mean? So 1 in every 5 of those events, 1,028, if it wasn't for one what-if and a whole lot of luck, the numbers at the top would have been significantly skewed and different for the worse. My experience, it's between 21 and 25% of all workplace incidents that hit your register. So you will never, ever, ever. So the green, as an example, the green areas, if you have an incident in those green areas, typically soft muscle tissue injuries will never, ever, ever transpire into fatal and or life-threatening, life-altering incidents. Can't happen. So you've got to focus really at the bottom there around those high-risk situations, around your management controls and what they're allowed to continue. Your blind spot. There's a few examples in a moment, but what you actually read in your accident incident reporting register a lot of times is your complete blind spot. I'll talk about lost time injury frequency rate, but I'm going to share here 2 incidents, and this actually happened within one of our clients, Middle East-based clients, food and beverage manufacturer. Stage 1, when we help our clients, or phase 1, is around data. It's looking at data, it's analysing a heap of data. So what did that data tell us? Well, it told us many, many different things, but it took, I think, 5 days through the exercise. And then I was doing a feed-out session on day 5 with the Chief Operations Officer, and I shared these 2 incidents with him. So the first one was, it was a lost time injury. And what actually happened was there was a worker that had a 20-litre container of water. They manufactured these things. And a worker was carrying it, upended it, and sprained his back. And he was off work for 7 days. And I said to the COO, I said, do you know about this? And he goes, yeah, absolutely. I said, what did you do about it? He said, we had a stand down for safety. We had an investigation. We rewrote the procedure. We trained people. We had meetings, briefings, toolbox talks, posters. And I said to him, and you lost part of your bonus as well? And he said, yeah, we did. So everyone in the business knew about this event. I said, all right. I said, what's the worst thing? If I repeat that 100 times, what's the worst thing that can happen to him? He goes, probably have a bad back. And he goes, yeah, exactly. It's not going to kill him. It's not going to be life-threatening or life-altering. You'll get some physio, a bit of pain relief, and you'll go back to work. Right? I said, this is the second incident. In your log, it's recorded as a near miss, and this is exactly what happened. There was a worker pulling a tarpaulin across of a load, and he was up. It wasn't actually this photo. This is the best photo I can get to replicate it. He's pulling a tarpaulin across the load. A forklift, a big forklift, came in, hit the side of the truck, and this chap fell. Lucky for him, there was a cargo net draped down the side, and he stuck his arm in the net, and it arrested his fall. And there happened to be a group of about 3 workers standing quite close to this, including a supervisor. And the supervisor said, oh my God, and he reported it as a near miss. So as I was debriefing the Chief Operations Officer, I said, what did you do about that? His answer, first I've ever heard about it. He did nothing. He did not even know about this. And I said, Rami was his name. I said, Rami, if you repeat this 100 times, what's a credible outcome? And he said, you now have my full attention, Daryl. So what we stick in the log a lot does not help us. Just to go further. So this is one of our clients. They're a Hong Kong-based utility business. And as you can see, again, 30 years, lost time injury free. Their LTIFR is, you can see it was quite some time ago. It wasn't nice, but they've done a lot of work over the years. They've had a lot of safety programs in place. And you can see, around 2006, it's next to nothing. 2010, they did have a fatality. And then in 2015, 0.0, and look what occurs, all right? So they actually had 4 fatalities. So whilst lost time injury frequency rate is an indicator. It is sometimes a blind spot. And I think personally, this is my own point of view, what it's helpful to do is benchmark you in your industry, but it does not tell you the overall amount of exposure that's within your organisation. My second headline here is around your incident, accident reporting and investigation processes. We're of the belief, and I've done this many times, they're actually not as good as what you perhaps think they are, your senior leaders think they are. They're possibly not deep enough if they're not capturing some of those aspects that I talked about, particularly why are they allowed to continue, such as culture and leadership aspects are in your investigations. You possibly need to go a bit deeper going forward. To give you an example, we always advocate, and we all know, there's different nuances of this. This is our hierarchy of controls. However, when you have these SIF potential or SIF actual events, if I put a line through here, so the lower half is what we call people focused, so administrative and PPE. So, it's around obviously admin, retraining, briefing, posters, change of procedure, etc., or you would like someone to wear a PPE as a control. It's hugely reliant on people's behaviour. Now, if you're in the special forces or perhaps nuclear business where you have a highly reliable workforce, and I follow my procedure, I remember training, I do everything because I know that if I pop my head up, it might get shot off as an example. If you have highly reliable organisations, and my litmus paper test is if you believe that they will follow the rule, wear their PPE at 2 o'clock in the morning, on the back shifts, on the weekend, when there's no bosses around, you will be successful. If you're not guaranteed that will happen, it will happen again, guaranteed. So your corrective actions, if they're in what we call the upper half, it's focused on true exposure and risk, right? So you'll be more effective in not seeing repeat events based on your investigation and corrective action processes. There's a whole heap of metrics around this that you can set as well. So typically, your investigations might not be as good as what you think they are. And there's just one or two take-homes for you. So from our point of view, very high level, to get really, really good at this, there's a few things that we believe you must do. Number one is around leadership, right? So the most senior leadership in your business, they need to know about this. They have to understand it. They have to own it. And any sort of intervention program, they must sponsor it as well. They have to be part of this journey around SIF prevention. So that's number one. Number two, you must have some visibility. We are of the belief you should look at your data and you should clearly understand what your high-risk activities are. And we also advocate building a decision tree. So instead of having a judgment-based, either it's I believe it's this, and then so that what I see a lot, safety manager, safety senior person, I believe it's this classification, goes to an operational person, no, it's this, it's that, it's this, it's that. So if you actually have a decision tree, it's either yes or no around one of these high-risk activities. So that's number one. You should also define from your point of view what life-threatening and life-altering is. Again, there's some nuances in some organisations. Some people, like to put in things like bee stings. There's people in the organisation that are allergic to bee stings. They stick it in there because they're of the belief it could be, life-threatening, as an example. But you should do that yourself. And then put some metrics in place as well. Give it that visibility. SIF exposure rate, actual plus potential is one classic. Effectiveness of corrective actions, how many are in the upper half and lower half, et cetera, as a percentage. But there's many, many more metrics that you should have on your dashboard. But they're the two that we always advocate. So that's the second thing. Give SIF some visibility within your company. The third thing, know where they are, know where they hide. So I mentioned before, those high-risk situations, clearly define and understand where they are in your business. I'll just pass on that they have to be inherent. I've seen organisations reach into industry and pull stuff out, and I think this is our high-risk industries. But don't be surprised, there's some things that are unique to your business, and I'll give you an example. We worked with a major ground handling provider, and through the data analysis, there was one particular one that stood out, which was sharp protruding needles. Now, the two instances where these high-risk situations occurred, so they have a lot of aircraft, and they have aircraft, it's called aircraft appearance, cleaners on aircraft basically. And what was happening was the cleaners were sticking their hands into those seat pockets, and unfortunately sometimes people were leaving hypodermic needles in there. So as soon as anybody got a prick, they're off work for 3 months due to the exposure of HIV/AIDS. So that was one. Secondly, cargo. Believe it or not, this particular organisation carries some really, really dangerous wildlife, like lions, bears, tigers, etc., etc. So some of their workers were actually getting literally mauled by dangerous wildlife. So they could have sharp protruding objects, and that was one of their high risk exposures that they actually put on their decision tree. So again, it should be unique and inherent to your organisation, but you can only do that through the data analysis. Start to actually strip out what's wrong with your management controls. So really do some detailed investigations on what the hell's going on, what's leading to these events, and then most importantly, they're never one-offs. Don't give me this, act of God stuff. I'm not a too religious guy, and I'm not getting into that on this call today, but they have been there. Possibly the truck situation with pulling the tarpaulin over the top. When I asked him, how long have you been doing this activity? And he said, for as long as we opened up this factory, he could recall. So it's been there since day one. So that's the third part, know where they lie. And then the last one, integrate SIF into as much as your existing safety management system. So don't change it, just integrate it in there. So your incident management handling processes, SIF, non-SIF, what high-risk activity is it? Those three areas around management controls allowed to continue, start to capture that data, start to formulate some control plans, put some metrics in place. Once you've identified it, you have a really robust and concise observation process. It's all about leadership and your HSE professionals. Go look for it as soon as one of those elements, whether it's behaviour, conditions or systematic, it should be a stop the work situation. Analyse the data, again, put some management control plans in place to fix, because these things will eventually transpire in your business if you're not. Educate your whole workforce, starting with the top, embedded into your induction processes as well. Your pre-task risk assessments, whether it's your safe work method statements, whether it's your job safety analysis, your overall risk management profile or processes that you have, sticks SIF in there as well. As I said, your stop work, your pause work authority, anything to do with those high-risk activities, if something's not in place, the job should be stopped immediately. You go the next step, you're not guaranteed the outcome, right? So again, back to what I said, I think Christian said, are you good or are you lucky? All right. Good. When you're good, people actually at any level in the business stop the job, have a conversation, put those controls in place, and we continue the work. Contractors, make sure they're aware of it, start to embed it in their processes and systems contractually as well. And anything to do with your life-saving rules or golden safety rules, whatever you call them, they should be covered from those high-risk exposure and activities that you have within your organisation. So that was really it, Christian and the team. Any questions, I guess? I hope it made sense.
Absolutely, Daryl. No, that was very, very interesting, and lots of good comments coming through. I think quite a few people are, fair to say, a bit shocked by some of the data, as in, perhaps they thought that we were in a bit of a better position than we are. If you want to,
can I just on that, Chris,
yeah.
quickly? So there was someone on the call the other day from National Highways. That data doesn't include anything on the roads, nothing on the roads.
Yeah.
And he said it's the same. Things are not getting better as well. So that's more workplace, not on the road. So sorry, Christian, I did interrupt as well.
No, that's fine. No worries whatsoever. So look, if you would like to ask Daryl a question, feel free to, if you're on Zoom, go to reactions, raise your hand, and I'll call you up to ask something. But in the meantime, I picked out a few things that I was keen to ask you about, and there's a question also here from Chris Lee in the chat. So Chris asked, if 81% of SIFs are normal work, how can you rely on near-miss reporting to find out anything of statistical interest when the worker or observer are only observing quote-unquote normal work and therefore seemingly nothing unusual?
It depends what's going on, though, I think, Liam. So if it's high risk, that's the thing that gets me. So any high-risk situation, even if it's a near-miss, what's one? A near-miss.
So it's about your perspective, isn't it? So like it might feel normal to you because if you operate a steelworks or a nuclear power plant, then you're kind of constantly in that setting, and it does feel normal. But obviously, you have to, I suppose, step back with some perspective and think, is this a high risk activity or not?
Yeah, exactly. So I think a classic might be I'm part of a lifting operations team, and I don't know. Let's say a pole or something dropped from heights. Of course, it depends on the height and stuff like that. But I call them "oh my god" moments. When someone in the work team says "oh my god," and you think if we repeat this 100 times and someone's standing under that load, it's a normal job. I'm part of a lifting team. I lift pipes, whatever it is, or beams, day in, day out. That's all we do. It'd be classed as a normal routine task. But it's the exposure to these events that's of concern that should be reported and has to be scrutinised as well.
Yeah. Chris has actually raised his hand. You got a follow-up question, Chris?
Yes, I just wanted to challenge a bit, if that's okay, Daryl. Is it because if 81% is normal, then the oh my god, if you're relying on somebody to have an oh my god moment, it's still down to the problem of perception. So I'm just trying to understand, is there other tools that you're advocating other than near miss reporting in order to appreciate and evaluate the SIFs that are in the organisation?
Sorry, Chris, I didn't make it clear. Can I to make it clear, I'll come back here. Okay, here. All right. So I didn't make it clear. I apologise, Chris. Let's take the lost time. Let's take those two scenarios that I shared with you. Worker picking up the bottle, all right, and spraining his back. See the green pieces on either side of the black part in the middle? That would be here. So it's a lost time injury. He's off work for 7 days. So in your register, it looks quite bad, right? But that never, ever, ever, and without drifting off into fantasy land as well, Chris, as us, I'm a practitioner as well for 20-something years, right? So that will never kill someone. Never. You agree?
Agreed.
Now, let's take this. The guy falling from heights, right? That is here. You repeat that 100 times, credibly, right? And potentially that could have been here. Now, I'll give you another example as well, Chris. Give you another example. I did a lot of work for a manufacturing plant in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. I did what we call it a quick and dirty SIF analysis, right? We take about 30 to 50 of the last recordables from first aid to medically treated, lost time, et cetera, et cetera. We don't put near misses in there because near misses, typically when people report them, they're pretty bad, right? So we include the first aid cases. Now, I stripped out their SIF exposure rate was very high, but this is a quick and dirty. From our experience, my experience, even the quick and dirty gives you a pretty good indication of what the hell's going on in the business. But it was really high. It was about nearly 40%. Then what I did is I looked at what are the high-risk situations, right? Now, a lot of these were first aid cases. There was 1 or 2 lost times. So they're here, first aid cases. And what was happening, operators, not maintenance people, operators were sticking their hands on these conveyor belts and getting stuck. And there was a heap of first aid cases. So from our point of view, high risk situation, energized motorized equipment. All right, you get tangled up in that stuff, nasty stuff. So that's hit. Now that for him was a routine job, just doing his work on a production conveyor belt system or whatever it was, making cardboard packaging. So this here could have ripped his arm off. It was only a first aid case. There was lots of them, first aid cases, but in reality, you repeat that 100 times, the outcome could have been a lot different. So my point of view, Chris, to go back, if you're spending all your effort on here, you're not going to decrease SIF exposure. But if you focus your efforts here, you will be more successful.
So yes, thank you, and I'm totally with you. We have a SIF program, although we don't call it that at Evotech. I guess my question is, all of what you described here and on the triangle is based on reactive information. So are there tools that you would advocate in order to get ahead of that? So your next event isn't a fatal and serious because you have an evaluation tool as well as a responsive tool.
Yeah. So the probably one of the most powerful ones that I mentioned is this here. Is once you've stripped out those high risk activities, behaviours, conditions that must be in place around those high risk situations, and then you train folks up in your business to go look for these things. Typically, from our point of view, it should be a leadership and or HSC professionals' task to routinely go and look for these. Mm-hmm. And as I said, as soon as one of those is exposed, it should theoretically be a stop the work situation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I found those two stories and the outcome of that really interesting as well, because how much effort is put into stopping that manual handling injury, and of course we don't want people to get hurt, but as you say, what's the worst that could happen? So I think there's a challenge, isn't there, about sort of the skill, I suppose, of being able to ask that question and give the kind of correct answer. Because as you say, in that scenario, what is the worst that could happen? Whereas if it was manual handling of, I don't know, hot oil or something, then obviously something much, much worse could happen. So I think there's layers of detail, isn't there? A bit of an onion we need to unpeel.
Yeah, I think back to here as well, Christian, when you're looking at this, we would typically advocate, all of us these days, particularly COVID, we run pretty skinny in our workforces, right? So even as soon as it's SIF or non-SIF, as soon as it's non-SIF, the amount of effort that you put into that should not be as significant as when it's SIF actual, SIF potential. So non-SIF, perhaps go and do a little fifth bone or a 5 Ys on it, a couple of corrective actions, get on with it, but SIF potential, SIF actual, it should be deep and it should be across, a lot more elements and a lot more time and resources should be put in those events. It can help you balance. I think it's looking at events through a brand new sort of set of lenses. That's the way we see it a lot of times with our clients.
Yeah, I like that. While I've got you, Daryl, you've spoken to me a bit before about so kind of taking on this theme. Obviously, what I do around slips, trips, and falls prevention, and I think the perception there is, well, what's the worst that can happen? But my experience and the data says that actually you do get injury, you do get fatalities, you do get amputations, you do get serious brain injuries, etc., etc. So again, that's one where you need to maybe unpeel the onion a bit more. I know you've shared with me some of your experience in that field. Would you just give us a couple of minutes on kind of some of your work and what your findings have been on sort of level surface accidents and the severity?
Yeah, I think so. You've got to use your data to define. That's the step one. SIF, non-SIF. So we do a lot of work in the behavioural safety sciences space as well. And what we find sometimes is particularly any fall backwards, Christian, any fall backwards. Sometimes I think anything that's above a certain height, which is probably about 1.5, 1.8. I know there's regulations and stuff like that, but again, we work with organisations to say credibly, if we repeat that 100 times, would the outcome be completely different? And we find out most clients go for about 1.5, 2 metres, whatever it is. That's their level of tolerance within the organisation. However, back to our behaviour-based safety sciences approach. Again, we use the client's data each and every time. We call it the inventory of critical behaviour establishment. And so we look at literally one of my last clients, there was 400 incident accident investigation report forms. And there's a couple of things that is unique to your business. One, walking and working surfaces always comes up as a major contributor in incidents and accidents. So that's number one. The other one is always ascending and descending. Now, whether that's stairs and or ladders. Now, depending on what's happening as well when these events take place, particularly above a certain height or any fall backwards, a lot of organisations we're working with would say that has SIF potential. The data, well, we extract it. What does it look like? Depends on the culture, depends on the leadership, et cetera, et cetera. But we have stacks and stacks of behavioural data points from that process. But it always comes up. It always comes up.
Good stuff. Rosemary, you've got your hand up. Did you want to ask Daryl a question or make a comment? Make sure to unmute yourself first.
It's a first world problem these days, Rosemary.
Yeah.
There we go. Good afternoon.
There you go.
Yeah, as you know, Christian, I'm pretty keen on the human element. My question is, how much time do you spend with the people doing the tasks in your assessments? I mean, do you canvass their opinions? Do you actually ask them what they think?
So what, as an organisation, Rosemary, our starting point is typically we have a reactive approach and a proactive approach. Sadly, to get the data and to work out what the hell's going on, those three things. So it's high risk management controls. Why was it allowed? We have to go down that reactive approach, Rosemary, depending on how many, the nature of your organisation, how many incidents. Typically, it's about 3-day exercise. And of course, we have to share our foundational concepts with senior leaders and the workforce as well. But it typically takes about 3 days, Rosemary, but it's a cross-functional team. Typically, it's, people who know the job, perhaps 1 or 2 safety professionals in there as well. So that typically takes 3 days to strip out the data, but we work with them. I mean, I always, when I'm doing, I say to it's literally a steering committee that we work with. We call it a SIF implementation steering committee, but it's not us. It's not us making it up. They read the narrative and say, SIF yes, SIF no, right? So we work with the people, and then part of the process when we're starting to integrate it into their existing management systems, we guide them, of course, but they end up scripting whatever it looks like going forward. So, yeah, it's definitely our particular program. So we get that reactive part, and then we look at the corrective actions. On average, this is no lie, right? This particular organisation in the food and beverage organisation, they had 400 incidents. 98% of their corrective actions were people-focused. And through that committee, I asked the question, how many repeats do you have? And they said, these things come up all the time. They just happen all the time. Why? Because you're not up in the upper half of the hierarchy of control. So once we go down that reactive approach, so when we set metrics up, measure your SIF exposure. Once you do your investigation, high risk management controls, why was it allowed to continue? Where are your corrective actions? Then, as we were just talking with Chris here just before, then we start to build in some other tools and metrics, such as field verification of critical controls. Train up people, design these control checklists where you actually start looking for these exposures and risks yourself, and then trend these action planning. Again, look at your hierarchy of controls etc., etc. So we don't throw anything on people's laps there, Rosemary. We work with our clients to come up with a collaborative result. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
But they strip it out themselves.
Doesn't surprise me that people go down the bottom end of your hierarchy of controls triangle. Sadly, I think there's still too much blame going on.
Yeah, and it's easy and it doesn't cost too much, Christian. That's engineering controls. You got designs, you got contractors. Sometimes you got expense. But the payoff, what we've found is the payoff's worth it. If your leaders and your organisation are committed, it is possible. But it's when you start to put some metrics on and you can say, well, how effective are these corrective actions? Only around SIF events. Everyone else don't, not, it's important, but not so important. But try and get at least one control in that upper half, or corrective action, sorry.
Yeah, that makes sense. Couple more questions. One, you just mentioned metrics. So there's one here about metrics. How can we make, and this came from the chat, how can we make the SIF status more visible to senior management using metrics? And how can we reliably quantify our observation reports?
So first one, put it on your corporate dashboard. Just start measuring SIF exposure. I just mentioned actual plus potential. Could be both, could be actual, could be potential. I like to see both. That's your overall SIF exposure. So try and get it on your corporate dashboard. Again, later on, once you start measuring that, put in a metric, again, your corrective action. How many corrective actions are in the upper half or lower half? Simple percentage, and what was the second one around observational, Christian?
Yeah. How can we reliably quantify our observations and report on that?
Observations around.
I guess it means like the safety observations, near misses or potential exposures where nothing actually happened.
I guess when things come in, you have to do a bit of review. It's always very subjective, that one. But I think if you've got a review process that looks at it, you can pick stuff up.
And I suppose every organisation is going to have maybe a different piece of technology or a different process to do that. But I guess the more important bit is once you figured out that it's there, as you just said, put it onto your recurring reporting. And then that will hopefully get the attention of the senior management team.
Well, there's some organisations we work with. We actually have part of what we do. Some clients like to buy our software called Adaptive, so you can actually enter particularly the field verification of critical controls. And what you can do is have a reviewer in your business as well. So it doesn't have to be everyone that's entered. It can be sampled. We typically advocate about if your observation process back to the field verification of critical controls, you have like a facilitator or that steering committee that I talked about. What they can do is go in periodically and review them. And we have like a 5-star rating. So, there's 5 parts to every control checklist that's entered. So 1 would be, that's quite poor. So 5, that's very good. When I look at it, when I read it, of course, that's this particular company, my last one I was referring to, have vessels globally, so they can't be there all the time. But the steering committee goes in and reviews these observations and does sampling. So that's one way you can check the effectiveness and perhaps authenticity of those observations as well.
Good stuff. Thanks for that, Daryl. Just quickly, I wanted to mention the next safety roundtable, which is in 2 weeks' time. We're going to be asking the question, does EHS maturity drive positive business outcomes? And Simon Glynn from Ernst & Young is going to be the guest. They've done a big report talking about business outcomes and safety and the relationship between the two. So we're going to chat through that, which is a topic that I'm really interested in. So do join us on the 7th of August for that. If anybody else got any final questions for Daryl, then now's the time, because I've got 1 or 2 more, and then we'll start wrapping things up. I was keen, Daryl, to ask you, you talked about the 4 kind of, what to do next principles: leadership, visibility to exposure, knowing your precursors, and then integrating SIFs within your existing safety management system. I'd be interested to know, in your experience, which of those four do you find that organizations typically are already doing pretty well at, and which tend to be the one that perhaps there's most room for improvement? And then second question would be, if somebody in the audience is kind of starting at ground zero here, where would you start on those four? Is it something where you start on the leadership bit first, or do you need to work at them all together, or how would you go about it?
What I find mostly of is this one here: educate your senior leaders, Christian. That's priority number one. A lot of times they're focused and fixated on things like lost time injury frequency rate, and they, like I showed that client in Hong Kong, focused and fixated on lost time injury frequency rate. There's this false sense that things are under control, where in fact, when we went to site thereafter, we do, like rapid SIF or SIF assessments for organisation. Once we did that, there's a completely different picture going on with this organisation. So that's one thing there that you have to do as an organisation. You've got to educate your senior leaders, and you have to get their buy-in. So that's number one. What I see a lot, I see some organisations, they start well, and then sometimes they sort of pause a bit and they don't fully integrate the SIF concept throughout their safety management system and processes as well. So that's probably the two areas where. So number one, go there, start with the top. Number two, embed it into everything that you're doing from a safety management system point of view. Did I cover that off, or did I miss something, Christian?
Yeah, no, I think that was good, Daryl. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Great. Well, look, I really enjoyed that. I learned a lot, some really eye-opening data and insights there. Do you want to just reshare and share your screen with your contact details on, and then give us any final little plugs? Where's the best place to learn more? Where can you find more resources? Yeah, no, I took over just to share the. You were sharing until I took over to share the next roundtable in a couple of weeks. So yeah, what's the best place to get in touch, and any kind of actions you recommend people take as a result of joining us today?
Yeah, so my details are on the screen. There's a QR code there as well. So we have a website as well where there's heaps and heaps of white papers. There's case studies. I think if you look closely enough on YouTube, there's if you look at Dekra SIF, you'll see a little video there. The little video only goes for about 5 minutes. That could be a starting point just to actually share with people within your organisation as well. If you need, we speak a lot as well at events. We're at, as Christian was just saying before this, we're at the health and safety event in Birmingham. We'll be there next year as well. I think it's next March. So my contact details are there. The website's there. Get in touch if you need further details. But on our website, there's heaps and heaps and heaps of material that you can access. So yeah. Thank you for having me, Christian. Thanks for everyone for joining today. Really had a good time. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, Daryl and Christian and my namesake for joining as well. And thanks to everybody that joined us. Hope you got a lot from this, and we'll look forward to seeing you on another safety roundtable and/or podcast if you're listening or watching this in replay soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christian.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.